Hello guys, welcome to our YouTube channel Medico Learning. Please stay safe, stay healthy in this COVID era. Press the like and the subscribe button if not already subscribed. Press the bell icon button to receive the notification. Thank you. Today the topic of discussion is JVP. What is JVP? JVP is nothing but it is actually jugular venous pressure. This is jugular venous pressure. The normal JVP value is 0 to 3 centimeter of water. This is the normal JVP value. And it basically measures the right atrial activity. It measures the right atrial activity. To measure the JVP, the position is recumbent, which is 45 degree from the horizontal line. It is done in recumbent position. The distance of the sternal angle from the right atrium is 5 centimeter, so the normal JVP value will be 5 to 8 centimeter of water. So this is the normal JVP value because we are considering the 5 centimeter distance of the sternal angle from the right atrium. So now the diagrammatic representation of the JVP. This is a diagrammatic representation of the jugular venous pressure curve. This is a diagrammatic representation of the JVP. It has A wave, C wave, and V wave. It has X descent and Y descent. So there are 3 positive waves and 2 negative waves. There are 3 positive waves and 2 negative waves. The positive waves are known as A wave, C wave, and V wave. The negative descents are X descent and Y descent. This is S1 sound, this is S2 sound, and the period between S1 and S2 sound is systole. Period before the S1 sound is diastole, and the period after the S2 sound is diastole. So A waves, C waves, and V waves are the positive waves. X and Y descent are the negative waves. As you can clearly see, the A wave is much more prominent than the V waves, and the X descent is much more than the Y wave. Because A wave and X descent are active process, and X descent are active process, whereas V wave and Y wave are passive process. This A wave is more than the V wave, and X descent is more than the Y descent. X descent is more than the Y descent because these are active process. Now we shall be discussing about each type of wave in details. So we shall be discussing about all the different kind of waves which are present in the JVP waveform. So first of all, A wave. This is A wave. A wave is a wave which occurs due to atrial contraction. It is a wave which occurs due to atrial contraction, right atrium contraction. And when there is contraction of the right atrium, the pressure within the right atrium increases. It occurs due to right atrial contraction. And when the contraction in the right atrium is there, the pressure in the right atrium increases. So there is increase in the right atrial pressure. What are the abnormalities in the A wave? The abnormalities in the A waves are first, absence of A wave. Sometimes the A wave can be absent too. It occurs when there is no effective atrial contraction. If there is no effective atrial contraction, there is no effective atrial contraction. It occurs in atrial fibrillation. So absence of A wave is seen in atrial fibrillation. Why it is so? Because in atrial fibrillation, the contractions are highly asynchronous. The contractions are irregular and occurring at a very, very fast rate. So the atrial contractions are not effective. So I repeat, the contractions of the atrium are not effective, so there is absence of the A wave. The second problem in the A wave can be there can be large A wave. The waves can be large. It occurs it occurs if if right atrial contract against a resistance. It means there is contraction of the right atrium, but it is occurring against a resistance. So the pressure in the right atrium will automatically increase. So the pressure in the right atrium is increased, because of which there will be large A waves. So there will be large A waves if the atrium is contracted against a resistance. It occurs in situations such as tricuspid stenosis. There is a stenosis of the tricuspid valve, so the atriums are contracted against a resistance, leading to increase in the pressure in the right atrium. In this diagram, there is right atrium, there is right ventricle, and there is a stenosis of the tricuspid valve, because of which the pressure within the right atrium is increased. I hope you don't mind because I'm going very, very slow, because the JVP is a very important topic. We need to understand the basic and the concept of jugular venous pressure and the various waveform. Also, the A waves can be large in cases of pulmonary stenosis, pulmonary artery hypertension. In this condition, there is increase in the pressure in the right side of the ventricle. So the atria has to contract against a resistance. So because of which I can say there are large A waves. The A waves are very large. It can occur also in volume overload condition of the right ventricle. There is volume overload in the right ventricle. Volume overload occurs in cases of right ventricle failure. And the right ventricular failure can occur because of pulmonary embolism and right ventricular MI. Because of right ventricular MI and pulmonary embolism, there is right ventricular failure. Because of right ventricular failure, because of the back pressure, there is volume overload in the right ventricle. The third, it can occur because of compression of the right ventricle. The compression can occur from outside and from inside. If the compression is taking place from outside, it is mostly due to cardiac tamponade. It is mostly due to cardiac tamponade. It is occurring from inside. It is mostly due to HOCM, hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy. In this, there is a concentric hypertrophy of the right ventricle, because of which there is a decrease in the decrease in the size of the cavity of the right ventricle. Because of the decrease in the cavity of the right ventricle, there is increase in the pressure, which is transmitted to the right atrium, and there are large A waves. So we have studied about absence of A wave, we have studied about large A waves. Absence A wave occurs in atrial fibrillation, and the large A waves occurs in pulmonary stenosis, pulmonary artery hypertension, volume overload condition, and where there is compression from outside, as in cardiac tamponade. The third point is Cannon A waves. So what do you mean by Cannon A waves? Cannon waves occurs when the right atrium contracts against a closed tricuspid valve. It occurs when the right atrium contracts against a closed tricuspid valve. The tricuspid valve is closed and right atrium is contracting, so the pressure is very, very large. It also occurs when the right atrium and the right ventricle contract simultaneously. There is contraction of the right atria, there is a contraction of the right ventricle, and both of them are contracting simultaneously. This is an AV node. This is an AV node. It sends impulse to atria, and it also sends impulse to ventricle. Here the pacemaker is an AV node. Why the pacemaker is an AV node? Because there is arrest of the SA node. There is arrest of the SA node leading to establishment of the pacemaker in the AV node. So the impulse from the AV node goes simultaneously into the atria and the ventricle. As the impulses are going simultaneously into the atria and the ventricle, atria contract and the ventricle contract at the same time. The second point is establishment of the re-entry loop. Establishment of the re-entry loop in the AV node. It occurs in cases of PSVT, paroxysmal supraventricular tachycardia. There is establishment of the re-entry loop. What happened here? There is a formation of the loop in the AV node. It occurs in PSVT. Here also, atria and the ventricles are contracting at the same time, leading to the production of Canon A waves. Canon A wave is important here. So we have studied about A waves. Now we shall be discussing about C waves. So after A waves comes the C wave. C wave, as already told, is also a positive deflection. So C waves. It occurs due to bulging of tricuspid wall. It occurs due to the bulging of the tricuspid wall in the right atrium in isovolumetric contraction phase of the right ventricle. If you have seen my previous video, I've already told about what is isovolumetric contraction. In isovolumetric contraction, both the walls, bicuspid wall and the tricuspid walls, are closed and the pressure within the ventricle is more. Because of which I can say there is a bulging of the tricuspid wall. Abnormality, there are no such abnormalities in the C waves. So there is a bulging of the tricuspid wall into the right atrium, leading to the production of C waves. Now comes another wave, V waves. The V wave is a third positive deflection V wave. It occurs due to filling of the blood in the right atrium from SVC and IVC. There is a filling of the blood in the right atrium from the superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. So the blood from SVC and IVC goes into the right atrium, leading to the production of V waves. Now, what are the peculiar abnormalities in the V waves? The V wave can be absent. Absence V waves are seen when there is no filling of the blood from SVC and IVC. There is no filling of the blood from superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. It occurs in SVC obstruction. Superior vena cava obstruction, which occurs in cases of malignancy such as oat cell carcinoma of the lung. So in cases of oat cell carcinoma of the lung, there is SVC obstruction, because of which there is no filling of the blood from SVC and IVC, hence the V waves are absent. Sometimes the V waves can be large also. It occurs if the right atrium already contains blood or clot. The right atrium here already contains blood and the clot, leading to the production of large V waves. The blood, as already told, can be seen in regurgitation stage, tricuspid regurgitation, and clot is seen in atrial fibrillation. Hence, echocardiography is important in patient of atrial fibrillation because of the presence of clot. If right atrium failed to relax, then also large V waves are present. It occurs in condition of constrictive pericarditis. I repeat, constrictive pericarditis. So in cases of constrictive pericarditis, the right atrium fails to relax, leading to the production of large V waves. Now comes the X descent. What is X descent? The X descent is the first negative deflection of the JVP waveform. It occurs due to caudal pulling of the tricuspid wall. It occurs due to tricuspid wall caudal pulling into the right ventricle. It occurs during rapid ejection phase. So in rapid ejection phase, there is a pulling of the tricuspid wall into the right atrium, leading to the production of X descent. There can be absence of X descent. So the X descent is absent. It occurs if the right atrium already contains blood or it has some clot in it. Blood has already told in TR and clot in atrial fibrillation. So it occurs if the right atrium contains blood or clot in it. The blood is seen in cases of tricuspid regurgitation and clot is seen in cases of atrial fibrillation. Because of the presence of the blood and the clot, the pressure won't be negative because it is containing blood or clot. As it is containing blood or the clot, so the pressure won't be negative and the X descent won't be there. I hope this is clear to you. Sometimes the X descent can be very deep. So deep X descent. It occurs due to more caudal pulling of the tricuspid ring by vigorous right ventricular contraction. More caudal pulling of the tricuspid ring by vigorous right ventricular contraction. It occurs in two scenarios: constrictive pericarditis and resting cardiomyopathy. So deep X descent is present there in constrictive pericarditis and restrictive cardiomyopathy. So this is the diagram showing the more caudal pulling of the right ventricle. There is more caudal pulling of the right ventricle. Because of the more caudal pulling of the right ventricle, the X descent is deep. So the X descent is deep because of more caudal pulling of the right ventricle. Now comes Y descent. The Y descent is the last waveform in the JVP and it occurs due to movement of the blood. It occurs due to movement of the blood from the right atrium into the right ventricle. There is a movement of the blood from the right atrium into the right ventricle as soon as the tricuspid valve is open. As soon as the tricuspid valve is open. Now comes what are the abnormalities of the Y descent. What are the abnormalities in the Y descent? Abnormalities can be absence of Y descent. The Y descent is absent. There is no filling of the blood from right atrium into the right ventricle. There is no filling of the blood from the right atrium into the right ventricle. This is known as ventricular diastolic collapse. This is known as right ventricular diastolic collapse. Because of right ventricular diastolic collapse, there is no filling of the blood from the right atrium into the right ventricle, leading to absence of Y descent. Sometimes the Y descent can be slow. There can be slow Y descent. There is a slow descent of the blood from the right atrium into the right ventricle. The blood from the right ventricle goes into the right ventricle very slowly. It occurs because of the stenosis of the tricuspid valve. As the tricuspid valve is stenosed, the descent of the blood from the right atrium into the right ventricle is slowed down. And the third point is rapid Y descent. What do you mean by rapid Y descent? There is a rapid filling of the blood from the right atrium into the right ventricle. There is rapid filling of the blood from the right atrium into the right ventricle, from the right atrium into the right ventricle. So this is a rapid Y descent. So we have studied about A waves, C waves, V waves, and X descent and the Y descent. So to summarize, this is a JVP, which is 0 to 3 centimeter of water. With 5 centimeter is the distance from the sternal angle, so it will be around 5 to 8 centimeter of water. We have studied about A waves, abnormalities of the A waves, absence A wave, large A waves, and canon A waves. So we have studied about A waves. This is a C wave. There are no such abnormalities in the C waves. We have studied about X descent, deep X descent. We have studied about Y descent, absence of Y descent, slow Y descent, and rapid Y descent. So guys, this was a JVP video. Please do subscribe and press the bell icon button if not already done. Thank you for learning with me. Subscribe to my channel for more medical videos at www.medicolearning.com and follow us on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook at medicolearning.com. Thank you. Please stay tuned and stay updated. Thank you very much.